afternoon and welcome to Sunday Brunch with Higher Heights, hosted by the SIP. Your SIP host, we're shrinking. your SIP host, Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, Tracy Sturdivant from the League. I'm Glenda Carr from Higher Heights, and Fatima Gosgraves from the National Women's Law Center and Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project are not with us, although you might see Fatima a little later. So we're on the final countdown to the end of voting on November 3rd, and let's say there's a lot going on. And so we want you to invite your network to this conversation, invite your crew. So share the feed with your Facebook or host a watch party. I don't do watch parties because then you are responsible for your own comments. But invite your network. And if you haven't, like the SIP page on Facebook. It's the SIP Hour on Facebook, so you will get notifications when we go live, because we will probably have some breaking news and updates over the next 4 weeks. We have 4 weeks. Yeah. Officially 4 weeks. And tell us where you are watching from. I'm trying somewhere new. I'm gonna play around. I got all types of backlit happening, but I like my chair. So I'm upstairs in the living room trying something new. And look, you see Tracy is in a new spot.
New spot, the living room, the dining room.
and yet I am not. So I'm wondering if I need to get a fall location for the SIP.
Or you can get one of those Zoom backdrops. I went to westelm.com. They've got some lovely ones. So you also kind of float in and out like a ghost too. So I don't know if I've quite
challenged. Yeah.
You need, well, you know what you need? So Star Jones has like made everybody's backdrop game tight. You need a green screen so that you don't fade in. Y'all know how y'all look, fading in and out of your backdrop.
Your head disappears, yes.
So you need, and it really doesn't need to be a green screen. It could just be a piece of fabric or something that allows it to adhere, the graphic to adhere. And so if you are up on your work Zooms looking crazy, coming in and out of your busy backdrops, stop it.
Don't throw a sheet up on the wall and step your game up. Okay. Fun fact, didn't know. Well, it is fall. We were just chatting about the fact that this week autumn arrived, and some folks are excited about it. Other folks are sad because they don't get to do the things. I know there's a big debate around to Halloween, to trick or treat or not to trick or treat, but I know some folks are leaning into all things fall. I was going to go apple picking this weekend, and then I looked at how far the ride was, and I said, let's go to the zoo. So we just made a beeline and did, everyone was sort of wearing a mask and sort of social distancing. So I felt semi good, but it's still like, there's still too many people for my taste. Let's go back home. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had said last week or at some point, because again, time has no meaning, that Halloween is one of my favorite holidays. And so we all have always gone all out. And so I feel kind of bad about, about kids not being able to go out. I mean, there is some guidance. The CDC does have some guidance up, but if like everything else, probably they'll change it tomorrow. But they do have some guidance out for sort of low risk, medium risk, and high risk activities. I think I'm going to put together little goodie bags and place them individually 6 feet apart out on hooks in the front yard, and kids can just grab one and keep it moving. But yeah, I feel there's a lot of little kids that in my neighborhood that, this is what they do, and they won't be able to in the same way anyway.
Well, interesting, Adrian. I learned something new. I would have not taken Adrian as a big Halloween person. Oh. My best friend, if she's watching, Marianne, they go all out. They have a theme every year, and usually the youngest kid picks the themes. I mean, they go all in with hand, she makes everything. Yeah. I'm not a Halloween person, but I am, I didn't realize I was a fall person until Tracy said it early, which means I like almost every season except for winter. But I loved the whole pumpkin, I'm more of a harvest thing. So when I was the chief of staff for State Senator Kevin Parker in Brooklyn, we did a harvest fest. And meanwhile, Brooklyn. So this Connecticut girl, I brought bales of hay down from I had bales of hay come down from upstate New York. And so we set up the block party to look like a harvest thing, which is what we grew up in Connecticut with corn. Although I am half Jamaican, and so the half the Caribbean folk in the community and me were roasting corn like Caribbean, like a Caribbean harvest fest. So I look forward to kind of decorating the house and moving from my Black girl who loves outdoor summer space to Black women that love outdoor fall space. So if you are not part of that Facebook group, they're going in on the fall decorating outside.
No, I'm taking up. My cousin and I were talking about this last night because I just moved into a new neighborhood and I'm trying to see what level of game the neighbors are, because I don't want to go, I don't want to be too extra. I also don't want to be like, she ain't done nothing. So I'm trying to gauge, are we doing scarecrows? Am I doing cobwebs? We were just talking about setting pumpkins or gourds outside, but worried about some critter coming by and eating it. So I might just wait till later to see, or go get some fake ones from Michael's and see if I can, create a situation. Trader Joe's also has very inexpensive pumpkins, all different sizes, white, orange ones. So that's another little fun fact in terms of if you're about to go down this decoration rabbit hole with the rest of us.
And people ask, pumpkin eat or not? Leah Daughtry, who is a contributor, posted a week ago. She's like, not for me. No pumpkin spice, no pumpkin. But I do have a good stuffed pumpkin recipe. So if we do a segment on cooking, it's really, as you know, Tracy, it's really good because I made it. Holidays were very big for my mother. So yesterday, September 26th would have been my mother's 83rd birthday, and she loved holidays. And so now, we now have kind of redesigned what holidays look like, but we usually do a Friendsgiving. So I guess I have to start planning a virtual Friendsgiving.
That we were just talking about, perhaps my mom talking about doing a virtual Thanksgiving, but a virtual Friendsgiving would be amazing too.
And still come all out. And so just that Tracy and I and that crew all cook. So it's tight,
for sure. Well, one of the things that is happening this fall is that it seems as if the Supreme Court nominee will get a vote. That was just announced. President Trump over the weekend announced his selection, Amy Coney Barrett, for the Supreme Court open seat that is now vacant because of the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Amy, in 2017, she was pulled from her job as a law professor at the University of Notre Dame and selected for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. Now, before she took that job, she had never held a judgeship at all. So talk about a leap for sure in her sort of trajectory. I think she has served for 3 years now in that role and now has been, announced as his pick for the court. There's been a lot, we could have a longer conversation. We will have a longer conversation about her and the fact that it is clear that they are hell-bent on making sure that this vote happens before the election. And I know on the show last week, we talked a lot about some of the hypocrisy between, what happened when Obama announced his pick and, Republicans being very clear that they felt like there should not be a vote in the midst of an election year. There were 200 and some odd days between Obama's announcement and the election. And here we are, election season has started, right? We are in the midst of elections. Votes are being cast, and we're also in the midst of a global pandemic. I know this morning Kamala Harris, who's the VP nominee for the Democrats, was saying not only are we in the midst of the election, we're also in the midst of a global pandemic. And so it seems as if the same calculation for why we didn't do it in 2016 definitely doesn't stick in 2020. What do you guys think about this?
Well, it's also to remind people that we've never, this is not historically, it's not been a partisan thing, right? It is in the history of electiondom, like making a word of it. In the history, U.S. history, it has always been a precedent that you would never see do a confirmation or see a justice during an election season.
Right, right.
I mean, the hypocrisy though is that it isn't just their 180-degree turn from Obama and Merrick Garland. It is that last point you just made, Tracy, which is we're in the middle of a global pandemic, right? People have not gotten their supplemental unemployment insurance since August. People are getting evicted from their homes. We have, in terms of the ability for our states and local governments to actually fund their functions, we don't have it. And so there is a real prioritization of that, all of those things that are actually going to help us get out of this pandemic, that they have decided to sit aside in order to confirm a Supreme Court justice, which is not a priority right now. Right, the American people's health, the fact that we are still, we're at over 200,000 deaths now, over 7 million cases, all of that is the priority. And yet here we sit with Mitch McConnell, and I this is not about partisanship, because to Glenda's point, everything that we are dealing with right now, from the pandemic to recovery from the pandemic to this election, should be nonpartisan. And yet we have a leader of the United States Senate who has completely upended and debased his chamber, and that keeps driving us off a cliff, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get an opportunity to watch the Sunday talk shows this morning to hear from Senate Democrats about their strategy. They've certainly come out and been very vocal that they feel like this is a vote against the Obamacare. Not to mention a host of other things that for sure are going to be, hanging in the balance should this woman be, confirmed. We definitely are going to lean into this conversation over the next few weeks. This is going to be a fight. Candidly, I don't even know if they're going to be able to bring this to a vote before the election, right. Just sort of given the time that it takes. And so the question then becomes, like, what does this look like, particularly with the Senate being in play, sort of post-election. So this is going to be a big fight. And I think, to your point, we are in the midst of an election. The election season has started. The last day to vote is November 3rd. And so just the amount of energy that I think that folks on both sides, are going to need to, gather peoples to be vocal on this. It's also going to take away from the work that we need to do to ensure that everyone casts their ballot this election cycle and safely. So I just feel like it's very just short-sighted from both sides, to be quite candid, because of the amount of energy that it's going to take to rally folks in this moment. It's going to be insane. So I'm just really sad and mad, for a host of reasons.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had a really exciting conversation on Thursday night with Miss Oprah. Glenda, you want to tell folks about that? They didn't get a chance to see you talking with Miss or I'm sorry, Judy was talking.
Judy I was just Oprah adjacent, which I'll take Oprah adjacent. So, Oprah Winfrey and OWN Network has partnered with probably 20 Black-led organizations across this country for her Own Your Vote campaign. And so Higher Heights is a proud partner. And so the NAACP partnered with Lady O for I guess you would call it an evening conversation with Black women. They had 29,000 people that tuned in to this, literally Zooming with Oprah in, I guess what was her sitting room. Like, she was, of course, at her house because she's been quarantining hard. And it was a conversation about the power of our vote. And our own Judith Brown Dianis was literally in conversation with Oprah Winfrey for a conversation with leading voting advocates and leaders. And so very proud of her. I thought she did a great job. The little thing, if you haven't seen it, everyone had on yellow on that panel. So it was Judith Brown Dianis, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, Tiffany Lofton from the NAACP, and someone else.
Mignon.
Oh, Mignon, if we watching Mignon Moore, who is one of the color girls and a political strategist. And they did not know until they did the walkthrough at 7:30, they all had on yellow. And then I joined 7 other Black women leaders talking about how do we own our own votes as leaders and as leaders of major organizations. So all of the 4 historically Black Greek letter sorority presidents were in attendance, the presence of Links Incorporated, Melanie Campbell from the Black Women's Roundtable, and the Dr. Janetta Cole from the National Council of Negro Women. And so it was a powerful night. And then behind the scenes, because we were all in these separate rooms, it was a production. Lady O stopped by to talk to us at the end.
Oh, she did finally. I was like, are you gonna get to say hello?
She said she needed, similar to the SIP. So y'all, we didn't even get on the back end. We'll talk about how raggedy all of us were this week. I didn't think I was gonna make it, but I was rushing to get home because she was like, I needed this space, and was emotional about it. And so it's something about Black women gathering virtually even is special to how we show up for each other.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. She has done a great job at utilizing the OWN platform as a home for Black women. And I just applaud her for even in this moment. Yeah, I remember when Oprah didn't want to talk about politics. So to go from that to hey, I'm going to gather all the Black women's groups, talk about how we going to vote is talk about her own political journey. So just really happy that she's utilizing her platform in this way. Yeah. Well, Adrienne, we've got a big conversation coming up, don't we?
Yeah. So, last Wednesday, for folks who were with us on the SIP, you'll remember we had a conversation around the grand jury report that had just been released. And so we want to pick that back up today. All of us, certainly here, the SIP hosts and people around the country, we're both angry and in some ways confused.
We're are they charging them? What's it happening, right?
Well, because it was a little bit of they're about to read charges. And then it was oh no, wait a minute, right? Not only are they only charging one of them, but the charges aren't even about the fact that they murdered Breonna. And so, just a lot of anger that I know that we had, and grief about the justice system failing our community and failing Breonna Taylor once again. And then we saw, of course, demonstrations after that of, around the country, certainly in Louisville, but around the country with people expressing their both shock and anger that we would not see charges of the police officers who killed Breonna Taylor. And so I think that this is such an ongoing, I think the demonstration suggests to us, obviously, that this is not over, that the country continues to have their eye on Louisville and to pay close attention to what's happening and demand not only justice, but real reform around how this could have even come to be. And so we are really grateful to have joining us again here on the SIP, Lonita Baker, who is an attorney and is representing Breonna's family. And so we want to bring in Lonita and ask her to bring us up to speed on where things are. We've seen a whole host of challenges in Louisville, including some of at least one of our other former guests being arrested. And we'll talk about that and the kinds of charges that protesters are being charged with as they demonstrate and exercise their constitutional right. They are being overly charged, I think most folks would say. But Lonita, thank you so much for joining us again. And I want to ask you to just give you a little bit of space to bring us up to speed on where things are and what we should be expecting in the coming days.
Yeah. So as you stated, last Wednesday, the grand jury, we heard the decision of the grand jury, which was to indict former LMPD officer Brett Hankinson with 3 counts of wanton endangerment, those counts of wanton endangerment were not related to Breonna Taylor. However, they were for shots that he fired that went through Breonna's apartment and into her neighbor's apartment, where there were 3 white neighbors. And I distinguish that because it's one of the things that makes me angry about the decision that was made, but also to where the legal explanation given by Attorney General Daniel Cameron does not fit. There's no legal justification here, no legal, I say makes sense, no legal sense. It doesn't make legal sense because 2 neighbors in the upstairs apartment, they also had bullets fly into their apartment. That family was a Black family. Where are their wanton endangerment charges?
Wow.
And not just those neighbors. Breonna Taylor, who we know is an innocent bystander, she was not armed. Sergeant Mattingly, in his own statement, says that she was not armed. And in Kentucky, it is clear that self-defense does not apply to innocent bystanders. If your actions are reckless and you cause harm or death to an innocent bystander, you are responsible for your actions. And that's exactly what we have here. If the grand jury found that Brett Hankinson's actions were reckless to the extent of wanton endangerment to the neighbors, that reckless conduct also applies to the neighbors upstairs and Breonna Taylor. And in Kentucky, we have a wanton murder. So if you're wanton endangering others, but you kill someone, it's wanton murder, which carries a significant penalty. We have, and it's unfortunate, when the grand jury report was being read, that is when Daniel Cameron met with Ms. Palmer, who was with her sister and myself and Sam Aguiar, her legal part of her legal team. We were meeting with him at the same time that these charges were being read publicly, even though we had been told we would get an advance notification. So I was still processing the information. But the more I thought about it, I'm a former prosecutor. Daniel Cameron didn't present these charges to the grand jury. Any charges regarding Breonna Taylor, whether it's wanton endangerment, wanton murder, second-degree manslaughter, he didn't present any charges to the grand jury because they did not read out that there was no true bill. They didn't read out anything related to Breonna Taylor.
Lonita,
until he disputes me saying that. At first, I was asking him the question,
Right.
and it's been since Wednesday, and he's not answered the question. So since you don't answer the question, I'm assuming as politicians avoid questions they don't want to answer, that that's exactly what happened in this case.
Come on, lead now, Lonita. All right, so let's talk about this grand jury, right? Like I've sat on a jury, case, an attempted murder jury case, right? Like I know how that works. But we don't know how these grand jury proceedings function. So talk to us, like you and your co-counsel are asking for the transcript, right, at this moment. So talk to us about that, and can you share with us like why? Like you're laying out a little bit, but like really curious to hear, both. Explain to folks like how grand jury proceedings traditionally function and why you feel like in this moment you want to see the transcript.
Yeah. So it's important. We always talk about the grand jury being an independent body than the prosecutor. It is, but the prosecutor also has a lot of influence over the grand juror. If you make a recommendation, they typically follow the recommendation. I always say 99.9%. That's not scientific, 99.9%, but just in my experience, more times than not, a whole lot more times than not, the grand jury is going to follow the recommendation of the prosecutor. So one, Daniel Cameron refused to say whether or not he made a recommendation. There's no rules that say that you can't answer whether or not you made a recommendation and what that recommendation is. Again, with the report that was read, all they read was the 3 counts of wanton endangerment that they were indicting Brett Hankinson with. Usually when you read out the report, if there are additional charges that were considered by the grand jury, it would say true bill, true bill, true bill. And then the ones that they did not want to charge the defendant with, it would say no true bill. We didn't have anything that said no true bill. So therefore, that's where I said, to me, you didn't present anything additional. The transcript is important because we want to know if the grand jurors asked anything, if they were presented, because the prosecutor is only supposed to be an advisory function. So if the grand jurors asked about, whether there needed to be charges against the other officers, if they asked about additional charges, that would be important to know, because if they asked about it, then the job of the prosecutor in that situation would have been to present them with an indictment to consider. So that's why it's important that we get the transcript, just to figure out what happened, what was presented, make sure that everything was presented, because while the legal team has had access to the Public Integrity Unit file, the Professional Standards Unit file, other investigations through our civil discovery, we're under a protective order, so we don't have the power to release it so that everyone else can see it. We want everyone else to see it, but we need the permission from either our judge or the city to be able to do that. But we do want to know what was presented. And I think that the public has a right to know what was presented. And if you didn't present everything and you didn't present it accurately, we deserve to know that.
And then what's the likelihood that that will happen? Like, is there precedent where folks have shared these transcripts previously, where you feel like there is some precedent, some more pushing can be done to get them?
Well, the example I gave at our press conference on Friday was they released the grand jury recording in Kenneth Walker, Breonna's boyfriend's case.
Yes, sure did.
So if you released it there, you can't now say, oh, we can't release it. You can release it when you want to release it. So now the public really has a right to know what happened, and you need to release it. I will say the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, who prior to becoming governor was our attorney general, he has called for them to be released. So it's not just coming from the civil attorneys to saying release this. This is someone that has worked in your position, Daniel Cameron, that is saying release the transcript. And if he's saying release the transcript, that means you can release the transcript.
Right. And can I just add one question onto that? I mean, normally we would ask this at the end of the segment, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it now, which is, I mean, obviously the pressure for this needs to be coming from the voters of Kentucky. But are there things that folks can do to say to y'all's attorney general that the eyes of the country are on him? What can folks who are watching the show right now do so that they can help lend their voice to the call for the transcript to be released?
Yeah, well, and I say even more important than releasing the transcript right now is what people should understand is a grand jury double jeopardy does not attach to grand jury proceedings. So what I think needs to happen is charges on behalf of Breonna need to be presented to a grand jury. And at this point, Daniel Cameron, since you have shown us that you are not capable of doing that in a fair manner, we need a special prosecutor appointed. And I would actually ask that it be a special prosecutor that is hired from outside, not any elected prosecutors, not another Commonwealth attorney. Hire an attorney with significant criminal law experience that knows you can't use self-defense on innocent bystanders. So Daniel Cameron, you showed us you're not capable of it. Appoint a special prosecutor, hire a special prosecutor, and have charges presented on behalf of Breonna Taylor to the grand jury. And that's the most important demand that I think we could have right now. I want the transcripts as well to see what all went down during the grand jury presentation, but it's important to know that we're not done. Like, it can still be presented, because there's no, oh, he was found not guilty. He was not found not guilty, or none of the officers were found not guilty. There was no indictment returned, but we don't even know if an indictment was sought for them. And if there was not, we definitely won't. Even if it was one sought, Daniel Cameron, you showed us, that you felt that. And the thing that really got me is during his press conference, he kept saying the grand jury decided.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But again, he won't answer, was it really the grand jury or was it your office's decision? So answer the questions, Daniel, be honest, put politics aside, do what is the right thing to do for America. And America needs answers, because, as we're going to talk about the protests, they're not just here in Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah.
It was I love the fact that she looked straight into that camera, was like, so Attorney General Cameron. But it is very clear that the city and the state, on the eve of, the grand jury's decision, were clear about the direction of how this was going, and then to me created a very, toxic political environment around the reactions of not only their citizens, but the nation with boarding up, downtown, and was already setting a tone. And, activists from local, I wouldn't even call it just activists, residents took to the street, organized by activists and national activists who have come in to lend support. One, standing in front of that courthouse crying, right? And so it was the emotion, and particularly this is hard hit because it's obviously Breonna and a woman, and many of the frontline activists who have historically been front lines in this Black Lives Matter were women standing there weeping, but then like pivoted and activated. And can you share a little bit about, the feeling on the ground for activists? The family, held a press conference, shared a little information there. And as you know, for those who've been following this, there's been some new laws enacted around how, you don't go get your desk appearance ticket anymore, that protesting could literally be a felony. And the fact that they've arrested and charged the only Black woman state senator, Attica Scott, who's a friend of the show and has appeared here, and her daughter, and she literally, if y'all watched it, go to her, any of her social media feeds, she actually showed her arrest. They were trying to seek sanctuary at a church that the governor had said, if you're seeking, before you break curfew. So they were not past the curfew, walking towards a church which was supposed to be a sanctuary, was blocked and arrested and charged with a felony. So can you share a little more about just the mechanics around these new laws and charges and just the feeling on the ground?
So in Kentucky, we don't have any new laws passed. We're still operating under the same set of criminal laws that we've been having. So I know I've seen a push in Florida and a push in Tennessee to just make even protesting a felony. Well, I look forward to those making their way through court being deemed unconstitutional, because you just can't, we have a First Amendment right to protest. The issue here, and I said it during my press conference, is Representative Attica Scott was charged with riots in first degree, and the allegations were that she was with a group that was causing destruction and attempted to catch fire to a public library. You ain't gonna have me believe that a representative who cares deeply about this community is setting fires to free public libraries. It just doesn't even make sense. And as you said, she's got her camera on, like she's filming, other people are filming. And we've seen that again throughout these protests. So, back in June, you have a report coming out from Louisville Metro Police that a car rammed into the SWAT bear, the big van. Well, live stream video comes out and shows the bear actually ramming into the car. So, they're making these stories, and thank God for the 502 live streamers. I always give them a shout out here in Louisville. They have been on the ground every day covering every aspect of the protest, and they have been protesting for over 120 days straight in Louisville. But the live streamers are catching what's really happening, as opposed to the narratives that are being put out by Louisville Metro Police Department and the narratives that even the mainstream media is putting out. And so at some point, the police department has to change its mentality. The lies, like they're exposing themselves even more. So if you lie about the way that we're protesting, the manner in which we're protesting, what makes you think that we're going to believe you when you say what happened to Breonna Taylor happened this way, as opposed to what the evidence is showing and make sense of.
So I just want to, I think that one of the things that Glenda said when she started, that there was this, this sort of doomsday aura, right, that came over the city before anything ever even happened, right? When the city started getting locked down, and parking garages were closed down, and it does feel a little bit like in that vein, you now have leaders, both movement leaders and elected leaders, being arrested. And it feels like the sort of attempt to discourage, right, people from both exercising their First Amendment rights, but also discouraging people from continuing to fight on Breonna's behalf. It feels like a part of the strategy, right? Sort of depressing people's, activism around something that is so clearly wrong. And so I want to ask, I mean, along those lines, we also know, I mean, so we know that Daniel Cameron just got elected to office, right? And so there is a part of this that does feel like continues to be clear, whether it's the mayor of Louisville or Daniel Cameron or others, that who we have in these elected positions matters so much. And not just because, we want to elect good people so that they just do good things, but also because we want to elect good people who will work with us to move the kinds of things. I mean, and the thing that strikes me about Attica as well is that she's carrying this Breonna law in the state house, this law that would ban no-knock warrants across the state. And so that is that's part of the tragedy of this attempt to sort of wear people down. But we know that we talk almost every sip about this election that's coming up. And we think about it as a federal election because it's the presidential election, but there are all kinds of other elections that happen in states, both in these big years and the off years. Can you give us a sense of whether or not some of the energy on the ground around that's been happening now for 120 days, if some of that energy feels like it is going to translate? I mean, we saw the primary, and we saw a lot of that energy translate into the primary and elevating certainly Charles Booker's race, right? So does that continue? Is that energy still with people and sort of driving people around electing officials who will do what we need for them to do in office?
I will say that the Senate race and the energy that was in that senatorial primary, I don't see that same level of energy, but there is still a lot of energy, and there is a lot of focus being paid to voting by organizers at Injustice Square, as we called it, where the kind of the protest headquarters. They have voting registrations going on. We have people canvassing and locating people who have been convicted of felonies to register to vote, because one of the things that our Governor Beshear did as an executive order when he took office in December was to restore their felony voting rights. And so we've been trying to locate those persons to get them registered to vote. So there is a lot of energy around voting, making sure you're voting early. The mail-in ballots are there. So many was thrown out in the primary that you're like, So I was a mail-in in the primary. I'm going to cast it said it was counted, but I don't know. So I'm going to cast my vote early in person for the general election. But yes, the organizers, we are focusing on voting. And I think one thing that here is we're not electing any prosecutors this term, but we do have a judge on the race. It's opened people's eyes to make sure that they're paying attention to those down the ballot races. So that's one of the good things, unfortunate good things that have come from this.
Well, Lonita, we are so happy that you came back and joined us. We suspect that we'll have you back again. Unfortunately, this is an ongoing fight. We are so happy, it's probably not the right word, but proud that you are there and holding it down, demonstrating that Black women's voices are important, helping to ensure that people are not forgetting about Breonna, and doing the work to make sure that she does get justice in this. And so just appreciate you sort of laying out things that folks could do from their homes, whether you live in Kentucky or not, and also lifting up like how important this election is, because elections matter. And this is a great example, an unfortunate example for exactly how and why our participation in this process means so much. So we'll have you on again, and appreciate you taking out the time this Sunday to join us in conversation.
Thank you.
Linda.
Thank you. Be well.
All right.
So yeah, elections matter. I was saying earlier that we are in the midst of an election season. The election has started. People keep, like, I gotta vote. Like, you can vote right now in many places. We've been talking a lot about folks making their vote plans and, getting the information that you need to know whether you're gonna mask up or you're gonna mail it in, and what you need to do in order for your vote to count. Either way, and this system, this election, more and more we are embroiled in chaos, from the pandemic to the uprisings to the election itself. And so we're going to have a conversation to talk about how we can stay focused on the big picture, and what else might be beyond this election in 2020. Like, what are the things that are coming down the pipeline? So we're so excited to have Dr. Khalilah Brown-Dean, who's the Associate Professor of Political Science and Senior Director for Inclusive Excellence at Quinnipiac University, with us this afternoon. Dr. Khalilah, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be back. Thank you.
We're so glad that you were able to join us again. And we have our sister Fatima Goss-Graves, who's been able to join us. She is on the front line, working overtime now. And so glad you're able to join us for this part of the conversation. Fatima.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, we're double and triple booked these days. But so glad to be in conversation with you and with Dr. Brown-Dean. So just picking up from the last conversation around turning protest and uprising into work around the ballot, we've actually are in this period where we're seeing new attacks on people who are peacefully protesting, expressing themselves as we are allowed to do in a democracy, as our Constitution actually guarantees. And I think we're going to see more protests in spite of it, but I have a lot of worries about what's to come. So, in this environment over the next less than 40 days, how can people assert their rights, their guaranteed right to be out there speaking and speaking up against what's happening in their communities?
I think the most important thing is that people first need to know what their rights are. And that means understanding that because we allow states to play such a key role in access to voting and in access to getting to the ballot box, that what that looks like varies by state. And it means that it's not enough to think that this year one can just wake up on election day and show up to the polling place as you may have done in the past. It means that everyone needs a voting plan that they need to have in place right now, today, to understand that a number of states have moved polling places. So where you went to vote in the primary may not be what's available to you in the general election. Having access to ballots in the language that you need, that is required by the Voting Rights Act of '65, needs to be protected as well. And the thing that I think is so important, Fatima, especially after listening to the attorney in the previous segment, who completely blown me away by her commitment to justice and to freedom, is that if people can show up to state capitals armed with their guns to affirm the Second Amendment, then each of us has an obligation to affirm the First Amendment that protects our freedom of speech, of protest, and assembly. If it's in the First Amendment, it shows how important it is. And I don't think that we should concede our power, and we also have to affirm our power and agency, even in the face of tremendous opposition.
So that's so great point to lift up here. I mean, I think that we have also just seen just this erosion of our democratic institutions over the last period of time, and are shocked several times a day, like not even every day, but several times a day, about the fact that what I learned about in the three-ring circus in Schoolhouse Rock doesn't seem to be holding up, right? This idea that there are checks and balances that we can expect the various parts of our government to uphold their role and their constitutional responsibilities. And we're seeing that in so many ways being eroded. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how, as we move forward, what do we need to do? What's required to restore balance and bring us back to our three-ring circus?
One of the things that maybe we have to do is make Schoolhouse Rock required viewing, not just for American citizens, but for the people who are elected and appointed to serve us. And that, I think, is so important, that you are in that position because you have an obligation to the American people. The other thing that's important, we've seen this erosion of trust in government and the institutions of government, but also in the institutions of community. To hear ministers and public figures become complicit in the very harm that decades ago, or even 5 years ago, we relied on those individuals to keep people accountable and to fortify the people that they are called to lead and called to serve. What I think is critical is that the mess that we are in this country right now in September 2020 will not go away regardless of who is elected in November. It will take time to dig out of this hole that is now the decay of American democracy. So just like we shouldn't have assumed that the election of Barack Obama would somehow erase 200 years of white supremacy and ingrained racism, we also cannot expect that whatever the outcome is of this election, that the people who have been complicit and enabled that destruction will suddenly go away. Because this is bigger than any one candidate or any one political party. There are thousands and millions of people who have stood aside and allowed this to happen and see nothing wrong with it because they don't think that it affects them.
Right.
I have been spending the last little more than a week living and breathing and thinking about the Supreme Court and what the overt politicization of it means for our democracy. And I know I want to get to the nominee since we now have a nominee, but I want your thoughts on this. What if they actually move forward with the plan they've laid out and confirm someone to the Supreme Court while people are voting for that next president and that next Congress? Is the Supreme Court survivable as a legitimate institution that people trust?
Yeah.
When I think about all of the ways that Black folks in particular have looked to the court for some form of redress, understanding that the courts, the legal system, the institutions of government in general have often failed marginalized groups or overlooked groups, there was still a hope that there was one space that was free from the kind of partisan division that has made Congress ineffective in a lot of ways. That for people in Alabama who couldn't rely on their local police department to keep them safe as their children tried to do the very basic thing of walking into a schoolhouse and achieve the education that we keep telling people is the key to the American dream. Now that we have allowed the Supreme Court, or people have actively shaped that court to be an extension of their own partisanship in ways that, as we know, will last a lifetime. And so it's about the process of appointing and confirming someone to the court during an election cycle, but it's also about the issues that we know will come before that court. In the middle of this global COVID-19 pandemic, the court is poised to make a decision on the Affordable Care Act. Think about 200,000 Americans who have lost their lives. How much bigger would that number be if people didn't have the right to health coverage, to go in and get testing, to be able to know that they could receive health care to keep not just themselves safe, but all of us, in an election where the court will revisit voting rights. So it's not enough to stand up at a memorial service for John Lewis and say you care. If you really care about his life and legacy, then you would ensure that the VRA is fully restored. And that is at every level of government making a statement about what are the so-called values. So if you're going to punish people for protesting, then you have to punish yourselves for politicizing the court in a way that, again, will last generations.
For sure. You know, there are a lot of hot races or races to watch, you know, that get a lot of attention. What are some of the local and state races that have the potential to have a really outsized impact on politics that you are keeping your eye on?
I'm so glad that you have raised this question, because I think we get so caught up in the presidential election that we forget that our greatest opportunity to have an impact on what happens in politics happens at the local and state level, and it also happens within Congress. When I look at the state of Georgia and all of the candidates who are running for office out of that state, the fact that you have 2 Black women who are running to fill that seat for the 5th Congressional District to continue that legacy of John Lewis, or determine whether the state will go in a different direction. When I look at the United States Senate, which overall is greatly underrepresented in terms of the demographics of this country, and that we have multiple candidates who are running. But then I also think about the future of this country, and to see a Cori Bush in Missouri who is able to unseat a longtime incumbent, it means that, you know, Glenda will know, as people are saying in Connecticut, it means your seat ain't safe. And you can't take for granted that because you have a seat, you don't have to work for and earn it. In 2020, the idea that we still have the ability to make history because there are 2 women running who, if they are elected, will become the first Afro-Latinas to serve in the United States Congress. There are prosecutors who will be elected. There are city council members who are up for election. The people who will determine whether our children can return to school safely, whether our student athletes will be protected and valued for their lives and not just as a commodity. So regardless of how people feel about the national election or whether they feel excited, what excites me is the opportunity to cast a ballot and decide the future for my child. And nothing to me is more exciting than working with other people to ensure that our babies are protected and loved on, even when the world tries to deny them.
Where do you think folks can look for hope in this moment? You've laid out some really exciting races for sure, but to your point, you know, we just spent quite a bit of time talking about this sort of grand jury decision in Kentucky and COVID cases, and everybody's exhausted and fatigued. Like, where do you feel like folks can look for hope or joy in this moment? You laid out a couple of races like that, Cori, but like there are some, but any other thoughts about where folks can look for joy or sort of find ways to stay engaged in this moment?
You know, it's tough. Yeah. And I say that as a person of faith. I say it as a person whose faith tradition says that we build our hope on things eternal, not on a candidate or on a party. But what is giving me hope in this moment of all of the uncertainty is when I talk to young people who say, no longer will we sit by and allow people to dictate what our priorities will be. I get hope when I listen to elders who are willing to bring a lawn chair and sit out for 4 hours or 6 hours because they understand what's at stake for them, for their children and their grandchildren. I gain hope for people, again, like Cori Bush, who are showing us that you don't have to have a lot of money, but what you have to have is a servant's heart and a willingness to serve, to understand that in order to lead, you have to be willing to serve. And I gain hope from these kinds of experiences to harness the power and the wisdom of Black women in the affirmative, not placing upon our shoulders that Black women will save this country, but understanding that we have gifts to bring and gifts to be respected. That's what helps me resist the kind of morose nature that can often be American politics, and especially when we look at the local level.
For sure. Well, we are so appreciative that you've come and given us a couple of nuggets this afternoon. Love to have you on the show always. And, you know, as this election season continues to heat up, I suspect we'll have you back for some more commentary about just the direction. Thank you again for joining us. I call her Dr. Khalilah.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank you too. Be safe. Be safe. So Fatima, we were talking earlier about this fight that's about to gear up and plans, no plans? What's the game plan?
Listen, they want you to think that it's over. And so that's the first thing that I would say is that they are going to do the work.
I'm on a fight.
Like, this ain't over.
This ain't over.
This is my democracy too. You know what I mean? The Supreme Court matters to me. So my view is that people should act like this nomination hasn't happened. It is totally illegitimate. I don't really care who it is, but
by people, are you talking about the senators? Are you talking about Mitch McConnell?
I think every member of the Senate should say, that's interesting. Anyway, that is not a thing that we can consider while people are voting in this way. And so I do not think it is a business as usual matter. So that's what I think. And I think the Senate needs to hear from people that they actually care about this right now. And people need to have this in their mind as they're going to the voting booth or the early voting space or the write-in ballot, however it is you are exercising your rights right now. You got to raise this up. It's too important.
Well, a Times Siena College poll said 56% of people, that's the majority, said that the next president should nominate the next Supreme Court justice. So that number could certainly grow. I think to your point, the work that we need to do for that 56% to be overwhelming is
people see it as the power grab it is, and it makes them uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable.
It's naked. And I think that this is, part of the idea, and I appreciate what you said, Fatima, about people should just say, oh, that's interesting and keep it moving. Because not only just because the fact that people are voting and not even voting, have voted. People have done their duty already. They have voted. But it is the idea, it sort of plays into this idea that they would want us to believe that it is over, right? Like it's gonna go like any other time. We nominate someone, it goes through a process, and then we have a vote. They would want us to believe that that is what's happening right now. And we don't have to accept that as the framework for where we are right now. That's just not, it does not have to be a done deal. And I think, Tracy, so senators should think that, but the American people should think that as well. This is not over. It does not have to happen in this way. And we do still have agency. We do still have, we may be heading headlong into an authoritarian dictatorship, but we ain't there yet.
It's like out of my cold hands. I do believe though that the collective they are underestimating the amount of activism that currently exists in this moment. And frankly, you could start to chart it from the Women's March on, right? Like there have been these waves, Kavanaugh on, the uprisings on, they're not ready for this street fight. That's about, or they're underestimating the street because it's the courts know what's paying attention. But I think that there have been a whole new crop of folks who've been activated and politicized in this moment, that this is going to be interesting.
And particularly when you start reading and hearing more about the immediate impact that this has on the court, particularly as it relates, we talked earlier to the ACA, right, and affordable health care. The notion that if indeed a new constituted court actually rolls back the gains we've made around Affordable Care Act during a global pandemic, when you're now talking about hundreds of thousands of people who now have a pre-existing condition because of their recovery from COVID-19, that touches everybody, and that doesn't touch race, It does disproportionately race, but overwhelmingly COVID came knocking on everybody's door.
It's like, listen, you gotta not upside your head because you were playing softball. That's a pre-existing condition. You need to call your senator. You know, you broke your toe.
Have you ever had a baby?
You ever had a baby? It's a pre-existing condition. You need to call your senator. Like, it needs to be that explicit, and that's the kind of work. And in addition to, like, you need to mask and mail your ballot, like the kind of organizing that is going to need to happen in this moment is going to be unprecedented. But I think folks are up for the fight, and we're going to continue to have this conversation for sure over the next few weeks in the run up to potentially the confirmation hearings and the election. So with that, I want to appreciate folks who've been watching along with us this afternoon. We love having you for Sunday Brunch with the SIP crew, Glenda Carr from Higher Heights, Adrian Shropshire from Black Pack, Fatima Goss-Graves, who made it in for the National Women's Law Center, and our sister Judy Brown Dianis, who I saw lurking in the comments.
I know.
From the Advancement Project National Office, and I'm Tracy Sturdivant from the League. Thank you all so much for joining us this Sunday, and we hope that you are healthy and well. Happy autumn.